And welcome to another edition of the Action Network Fantasy Flex Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Raybon, here as always with Sean Kerner. And today we are going to be breaking down running backs. We have a very special guest. But before I get to that, we have to let you guys know this is important. All right, guys. So as we've alluded to in the past few weeks, we're moving this NFL fantasy show to its own podcast feed effective immediately. If you want to keep listening to me and Sean every week, you need to subscribe to our all new podcast, which is just called Fantasy Flex. And don't worry, switching over is easy. Just click the new Apple Podcast link in this episode's description, which will let you follow the all new Fantasy Flex podcast for all of our new NFL fantasy episodes, or just search Fantasy Flex wherever you like to listen to podcasts, starting right now with our next episode, which will be the second part of our running back positional previews featuring the incredible Jake Seeley, which is already live. You can listen to it right now if you want. So right now, go follow and subscribe to Fantasy Flex on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. All right. Now that that's out of the way, I'm very excited about today's guest because who better to be talking running backs with than Graham Barfield, the co-owner of FantasyPoints.com and the founder of Yards Created. Graham, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. This is always fun. I think we did this a couple years in a row now, so running it back for the third straight years is great, and it's a perfect time to talk to you guys. I mean, training camp's rolling, actual news is rolling in. So yeah, it's always an exciting time. I don't know about you guys. This is always like one of my favorite times of the year. This, the draft, and then obviously like the opening of the season.
Oh yeah, when just like reading through nothing but 53-man roster projections and training camp notes, like all right, I got to do 32 times 32 times. It's crazy. But Sean, what's going on, man?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Grant. You know, preseason is my guilty pleasure. So we get our first game tomorrow, the Hall of Fame game. I can't wait to be rooting for Dwayne Haskins. This might be the last time I ever have money riding on Dwayne Haskins, but it's happening tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And even though this episode probably won't drop till
right.
The game is long over. But with that being said,
Dwayne Haskins just threw 2 touchdowns and 2
right.
Well, if you're listening to this, I'm probably raging that Dwayne Haskins threw 2 interceptions and blew up all my teams. But
oh man. All right. So enough Dwayne Haskins talk. We got to get to the moneymakers, the fantasy moneymakers, and that is the running back position. And we're going to talk through all of the different RB1s. So I know a lot of people, you guys love to kind of think about what you're going to do early in the draft. Well, this is the episode for you because all these guys are going pretty early and they can make or break your roster. So Graham, before we get into kind of going running back by back here, I do want to start off with a question for you. It's a notoriously volume-driven position.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yards per carry is so volatile. It's hard to predict. So we're looking for every little edge that we can get. And you invented a methodology called Yards Created, which, helps evaluate back. So tell people a little bit about that and how it kind of gives you an edge.
Yeah, so, man, 6 years ago, I started charting college running backs and, just kind of breaking down, what happens after the offensive line has or has not done its job. So, this was 6-7 years ago. So this is before PFF and Sports Info Solutions had come out with a lot of new metrics on running backs. But when I was starting this up, it was I would always see, scouts or people on Twitter mention, hey, this guy is really good at making guys miss, or hey, this guy's not very good at, breaking through contact, but there's no numbers associated with that. So Yards Created kind of, it does that. It breaks down, I chart every running play for college running backs in terms of yards blocked and yards created. So after, let's say running back's offensive line opens up 4 or 5 yards of a hole, the running back makes a linebacker miss and goes on for 5 or 6 more yards. I chart that as 4 yards blocked, 5 or 6 yards created, and a missed tackle forced by the on the linebacker. And I also chart, receiving plays. So I chart pass protection, what kind of routes these guys are running, how deep their targets are. So it's kind of like a full breakdown of how, not only how efficient running backs are in college relative to their offensive line, but it also, goes into usage and all of that good stuff too. So yeah, and this class, man, was not very good. Like just off the top, like we got a super top heavy class. And other than that, it's pretty dry in these streets.
I got to ask you, like, who was the back that, after charting surprised you the most, whatever the results were, whether positive or negative?
Man, this year, I didn't really realize how good Javonte Williams was. Like I watch like a little bit of college football. I try to catch like a couple games like every week. But I really just don't have the time to like sink my teeth into college stuff until, after the Super Bowl. But yeah, Javonte Williams was definitely like my favorite watch this past year for sure.
Yeah, it's like the Broncos almost seem like they know what they're doing again. Like, they always kind of draw you in, and, they had that Super Bowl, and then, they obviously changed, the front office and whatnot. But I mean, this team is so like attractive on paper, except they just have this huge hole at quarterback and this huge hole at center. Yeah. But I mean, the rest of the roster stacked, and I too like Williams. I think he's going to have a pretty big year. But let's get right into a guy who did not have a big year last year, and that was Christian McCaffrey. And that was because couldn't stay healthy, played only 3 games, but we're not getting any type of injury discount. We're not getting any type of Sam Darnold discount. Graham, what are your thoughts on McCaffrey as the number 1 running back, as the number 1 overall fantasy pick in 2021?
Yeah, and you're not getting any injury discount for good reason, man. I mean, McCaffrey has been, bulletproof the last 2 years. Obviously, missed all those games last year, like you alluded to. But like even in the games he did play, I mean, he was still the same, like high floor, high ceiling player. Over the last 2 years, he's averaged 29 fantasy points per game, which is just absurd. And he scored 20 or more in all but 2 of those games that he's played. So I mean, the floor is literally 20 points. So even if you bake in a little bit of regression for this team, I still think McCaffrey, scoring 25, 26 fantasy points, that's still going to be ahead of, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara by, a couple points. So even if you expect a little regression here, he's still by far and away. There's just so much like margin of safety with McCaffrey that he's still by far and away the 101.
I mean, nobody predicts regression better than you. What do you have it at 25, 26 fantasy points?
Yeah, I think, that's the big thing is like, what is this offense going to look like with Darnold? Like how many times are they going to be in scoring range? But the floor is just so sick with them. I mean, I don't really think Darnold's going to, do too much differently in terms of like targeting their backs. So yeah, just a slight dip, but I don't think he's going to be at like 29, 30, but like, 26, 27, 28 is very, very doable. And like I said, I don't think that's that big of a difference from like Cook, Kamara, and Henry.
Sean?
Yeah, I agree with Graham. I think Christian McCaffrey is just a slam dunk at number 1 overall. I'm not concerned. I know you're trying to throw out things out there that we should be concerned about. They are concerns, but he has about a 30 to 40 point cushion over Dalvin Cook.
Yep.
So he's going to need a lot of things to go wrong to not be number 1. But, we saw, even though he was only able to play in 3 games last year, he finished 2nd, 6th, and 2nd. Those weeks. So, I mean, he just had a monster season in those 3 games. And then we saw, Mike Davis thrive in this new scheme under offensive coordinator Joe Brady. We've seen him, come through the Saints organization with Alvin Kamara. He coached Clyde Edwards-Helaire at LSU. So he has a really good scheme for pass catching backs. We saw it last year with Mike Davis. So I think the ceiling on Christian McCaffrey might be higher than we're thinking. But, I am a little bit concerned the offense might not be great under Sam Darnold. The offensive line has some concerns, but I think Christian McCaffrey is so good and he's going to see so much passing work that I'm able to overlook those because, as you mentioned, efficiency isn't that important when it comes to running back. It's all about volume, and he's going to see that very valuable passing work. That's why I'm taking him every single time number 1 overall.
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't know if it's like the investing background or what, but if I get 100 number 1 picks, like I'm never taking one guy 100 times. Like I always want to kind of diversify a little bit because you're always taking running backs and there's just a non-zero chance that they're going to get hurt. And I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later. I think there are some kind of predictors, but you really, at the end of the day, you don't know. Like Christian McCaffrey was the most durable back heading into last year out of pretty much this side of Derrick Henry.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I always love making that point. Just because you take McCaffrey first doesn't mean he's going to finish first overall. Mm-hmm. But think of it this way, like if you have the second pick, you're never going to have a chance to take McCaffrey.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it is a way to kind of diversify exactly what you're saying, where, if I have the second pick, I take Dalvin Cook. So I'm getting an equal number of shares. And the only way to do that really is to take McCaffrey number one overall. So I agree with your logic there, but it's almost impossible to not get him after number one.
If you catch me in the right draft, you could get McCaffrey second.
That's what Chris is
right. I'm on board with McCaffrey number one. I just, this is people's number one pick. We have to kind of talk about these things. I'm sure there were people that were pretty pissed off last year when he was their number one pick and it didn't go well. So we just have to kind of talk through these things and kind of tell people when we're concerned, when we're not. And here's where I think it gets interesting, because number two is Dalvin Cook. Sean, you just mentioned him, McCaffrey with the big cushion over him. And Graham, I'll start with you. I mean, Cook is a guy that in the past, he was another guy kind of labeled as injury prone, broke out of that last year, one of the two backs with over 300 carries. And now he's locked into that number two spot. Is he a slam dunk number two, or can you make a case for an Alvin Kamara or a Derrick Henry?
Yeah, I think there's a big tier drop off. I wrote this up and I did like a big best ball tiers article, and I mentioned that like McCaffrey should get his own tier, but I just lumped them together because they're obviously all going off the board in the same range. I do think Cook, Kamara, and Henry is close. I'm giving the slight edge to Dalvin Cook over Kamara just because he has a slightly higher touchdown upside, and his floor is just like so safe in terms of just touches. But I mean, it is really close. I mean, over the last 2 years, McCaffrey has finished as an RB1, so that's top 12 in weekly points, 89% of his games, so basically every single time. Then it dips down to Kamara at 66%, Cook at 64%, and then Henry at 58%. So if you look at just kind of like ceiling games, and that's not necessarily the best indication of ceiling games, but if you just look at like kind of who's producing as the RB1 most often, yeah, that third tier is really, really close. But Cook's floor is just so safe, man. And, he 25 touches per game. That's right in line with Derrick Henry. He's got, more passing down usage than Henry. I do think I'm making like that small delineation between those two, between Cook and Henry, because Cook has that passing game usage. But yeah, it's no doubt close. And I think this is one of those scenarios, Chris, where like if you get, a top two, you get second, third, or fourth overall, this is where you want to like mix up your exposure and kind of change things up a little bit, because like Sean said, you're very rarely going to get McCaffrey at 2 or 3.
Yeah. And Sean, you're the one that kind of mentioned Cook initially about, you kind of have him at that number 2 spot. Is there a gap for you between Cook and Henry or Alvin Kamara?
Yeah, I do think, Cook's sort of in a tier by himself at number 2. I think, CMC is way up here. Then there's Cook. And then I think there is a big enough gap ahead of, Cook and Kamara and Henry that I would draft Cook almost every time, number 2 overall. You mentioned, the only knock we've had on Cook the past few seasons is he's, an injury risk. But, he's stayed pretty healthy the past 2 seasons. He's played 14 games each season. So I think that's one thing that we need to just urge caution about is, don't take injury risk too seriously. Guys can bounce back, and, a guy like Cook, I think we can, pencil in for 14 and a half games played like every other running back. But, he has, some of the most bankable volume in the running game, passing game, and in the red zone. He's just a slam dunk pick. And the Vikings defense should be much better this year. I think we'll get a lot more run heavy game scripts. Mike Zimmer loves to run the shell of the ball. So I think Dalvin Cook is set up for a huge workload this year. And the offensive line should be better. They drafted Christian Darrisaw in the first round. So I think there's a lot of things going in Cook's favor this year, coming off a great season last year. But I think we have still yet to see Cook's best season. I think that could be this year.
Yeah, I think Dalvin Cook is like, when I project it out, Dalvin Cook is just unquestionably my number 2 running back. But I do think we should be mixing it up pretty evenly. And the reason is I kind of think that Cook is a little bit of an injury risk, not because he's been one in the past, but if you look back, and this is just over the last few years, but you go back to like, because remember, Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry, the next guy we're going to talk about, these two guys, 378 carries for Henry, 312 for Cook last year. No one else had more than 273. Like if you just go back over the last few years and look at the guys that had that big of a workload, I mean, it goes downhill pretty quick in their futures. I mean, Le'Veon Bell in 2017 with Sean McCoy. Then you have 2018, Todd Gurley, Saquon Barkley, his rookie year, he was second in the league. David Johnson was third. Gurley was fourth again. Adrian Peterson and Jordan Howard in that mix. And then Ezekiel Elliott pops up, and then he struggles. Christian McCaffery. Like, it's really tough, I think, to kind of withstand and repeat that 2 years in a row. So, like, even though I do agree you're not going to be able to pinpoint injuries, I do feel a little bit better about a guy like Kamara, who hasn't taken quite as much of a pounding yet. And because, like, I just feel like at any moment, like, Henry's gonna, like, it's got to happen at some point, right? Like, we were kind of like so confident in McCaffrey, and I think I was even projecting him for like 15 games last year instead of the usual 14 and a half. And look what happened. But I do want to kind of get back to Alvin Kamara, and I think he's a really interesting one to discuss, Graham, because a lot of people kind of talked about his downturn with Taysom Hill at quarterback, and I think that was there were some underlying circumstances that weren't just because of Hill. But when I look at Kamara, and then I think about Michael Thomas potentially missing time, Alvin Kamara in 52 games with Thomas averages 20.2 PPR points. That's good. That's really, really good. In 8 games without Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara averages 30.9 PPR points per game. 30 average over an 8. That's half a season. Like, if Alvin Kamara gives you 8 games of 30 points, you may have won your league. Like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially if like one of those other guys get hurt. So like, how do you feel about Kamara and kind of his outlook heading into this year?
Yeah, so that's why I actually have it close between Cook and Kamara. Like you alluded to with Cook, our guy Evan Porras mentioned in his injury tiers article, he broke down Cook doesn't have like chronic shoulder problems, but he keeps having these shoulder issues that just keep like popping up. It popped up again last year. So yeah, just definitely something to keep an eye on. And I think that small injury risk, because like I hate playing the injury predictor game. I just think it's kind of silly. But Cook actually does carry more injury risk than, McCaffrey and Henry and Kamara, guys in his tier. But yeah, I was pretty concerned about Kamara's usage with the quarterback change, no Drew Brees this year. But like you alluded to, man, Kamara is just a sicko with no Michael Thomas. And really Sean Payton, for as long as, Thomas sits out, Sean Payton has no other choice but to run this offense through Alvin Kamara. And, to that point, even if it is Taysom Hill starting, those 4 games that Taysom started last year were a little weird from like a game script perspective. And I've seen a lot of people like point out, Kamara just didn't get the volume that we were accustomed to in the passing game. And there's a little bit of truth to that, but like, if you look back and think about it, like they stomped the Falcons in the first game Taysom Hill started. Then it was that weird Broncos game where the Broncos had to start that wide receiver Kendall Hinton. So you kind of just have to throw that game out. They stomped them 31-3. And they came back a couple weeks later, played the Falcons. Kamara had a nice game, but didn't get like the big receiving workload that we're used to. And then that final game, they played the Eagles in a much, much closer game. The Eagles actually ended up winning that game, and Kamara had 10 targets, which is right in line with what we're expecting. So yeah, the thing with Kamara, man, is like, I'm not a fan of extrapolating like really small volume amount of games. And even if Taysom does get the start week 1, I'm not that concerned with his passing volume. I think we're going to see him slide right back into like 6, 7, 8, 9 targets a game.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I mean, I just really think the targets are going to be there. You mentioned Sean Payton. This is what he does. Like, it's a whole totally different thing from like having your man crush go from like your special teams ace/wide receiver/tight end/running back to like having to start him at quarterback. Like, yeah, you're going to use Kamara as like a decoy and, get on and they won games. But now he has the whole off season, and their season is kind of riding on Alvin Kamara. Like if Alvin Kamara isn't 30 points per game, Alvin Kamara, the Saints are probably not going to be good this year. So I think it's going to be totally different. But with Sean, I mean, am I crazy for thinking Alvin Kamara may have, the best chance of anyone if Christian McCaffrey stays healthy of beating him out?
That's certainly fair. I think his ceiling is massive. You guys have mentioned without Michael Thomas, they have no other choice but to feed him the ball. I will say I am a bit concerned. His fantasy points without Breeze the past 2 seasons has been 16 points, where with Breeze it's 24. I think Breeze is a perfect fit for him. He's more willing to check down. When it's not schemed up to Kamara, he'll check down and give Kamara a reception. Whereas, Jameis Winston, I think, will opt to throw deep, be more aggressive, and Taysom Hill has shown that he's more willing to run. So that's enough of a concern for me to just draft Derrick Henry over him. Not 100% of the time, but maybe 52% of the time. But Kamara does have that massive upside. I mean, he literally is the Saints offense. Sean Payton is too much of an offensive genius to not give him the ball. So, I'm with you guys. I'm willing to overlook those small sample sizes where Kamara wasn't as good without Breeze. But at the end of the day, I'm still leaning towards Derrick Henry in this range.
I'm going to plant my flag on this one. I'm going to say that I don't think there's going to be any issue with Kamara. I think the issue with Breeze and Kamara's downturn is kind of the same thing you saw with when Taysom Hill took over. It's that when usually it's like, okay, now Breeze is not here. Now a star is not here. So you use Kamara as the decoy. But now it's just such a different situation that you have no choice but to build the whole offense around Kamara. It's not like you have okay, you could go Bridgewater to Michael Thomas, because even Thomas is out half the year. It's just this is the offense. So I'm going to say Alvin Kamara beats out Derrick Henry this year. I'm going to say, and let's remember when Christian McCaffrey got hurt last year, who finished number 1 in PPR points? Alvin Kamara. So I love me some Kamara this year, but let's go to let's talk some Henry, because he's another guy. I mean, I almost can't help feeling more confident in taking Derrick Henry than any other running back. It just doesn't feel like he's ever going to get injured. He has these massive ceilings. Even watching him, he's the only guy I think I've ever watched that you just don't even feel like he's going to get tackled. I mean, Graham, I know that it's just guy is just a freak of nature. Yeah. What are your thoughts on him? How high would you take him?
Yeah. So last year I had Henry as high as 2. Yeah. This year I've been taking him as high as 2, but really I think there is a difference between Kamara and Henry now that with the Michael Thomas news, I think I'm kind of using that as the deciding factor of okay, this splits Kamara and Henry. Because like you mentioned, man, the upside and this consistency with Kamara is a little bit higher than Henry, because Henry is kind of like Dalvin Cook in the sense that he's game script dependent. I pulled this up, and his 38 starts since the back half of that 2018 season, when they finally gave him the starting role over Deion Lewis. In those 38 starts, Henry has averaged 24.3 fantasy points per game and 140 yards rushing per game, and the Titans 24 wins. But that dips to 12.2 fantasy points per game and just about 75 rushing yards per game in their losses. So huge splits for Henry. I don't think the Titans are going to have too much of regression in terms of just the win department. They still should be in that 9 to 10, 11 pocket with the extra game, especially considering the Colts, man. Poor Colts. They are just falling apart here. I mean, that AFC South is going to get really thin really quickly, especially with the Deshaun Watson situation up in the air. Titans are heavy favorites for the AFC South again with all of that news. And Henry's floor is just a little bit lower than Kamara and Cook's, because Cook and Kamara obviously have that passing down juice. But Henry, man, I've rectified all of my Henry fading from, a couple years ago. I was completely out in 2018. I had a little bit of him in 2019, and then I went all in last year, and I'm back to taking a lot of Henry in that 3-4 hole when, the board falls that way.
So if, can you speak on the, I know people are going to kind of bring up the, what is it, the curse of 350 or something? Because Henry did carry the ball 378 times. Is this something we think he, like, how, I guess the question is not like, again, you can't predict injuries, but just how much longer can he do this?
No, it's true. I mean, he did this, man. I'm from Jacksonville. I went to high school and middle school and college in Jacksonville. When I was in high school, Derrick Henry was at Yulee, and he was carrying the ball 35 freaking times a game for like 300 yards. So he's been doing this since he was like 18 years old. So I hear you. That wear and tear is definitely going to catch up with him. But every turn of Henry's career, from high school to college and now in the NFL, he's been an outlier, man. And the dude, like, you just don't see 6'2", 245 backs doing the stuff he does. So, yeah, man, I think that cliff, like, if we're talking dynasty, I would probably be looking to sell high on Henry. But for this year, I still think he's just like locked and loaded into like one of the most valuable roles in fantasy.
And Sean, any notes on how you're projecting, how your projections of Henry might have changed with the change in offensive coordinator, with, obviously Arthur Smith going to the Falcons and then them bringing in Julio Jones?
Yeah, I think the Julio Jones trade should only help Henry. It's going to be even tougher for defenses to really worry about stopping Henry. If anything, they'll just let Henry run wild and make sure that Julio and AJ Brown can't beat them. But, I have, been consistently ahead of ADP on Derrick Henry the past few seasons. And sadly, I'm in line. I have him third overall. But you can never go wrong with Henry. You even mentioned it, like he's the most likely running back to play all 17 games. I mean, just look at him. He's a beast. I think he's going to have a really good schedule. And, he always tends to peak at the best time of the year, end of the season when defenses are worn down. He usually gets to face the Jaguars and runs all over them. So he's usually a fantasy playoff, league winner. So that's why I always love getting Henry. He always peaks at the right time.
Oh yeah. Everyone will remember it started late in that 2018 season. I think he had a couple of 200-yard games. He threw the Jaguars whole team off of him on like a Thursday night. Like, it was just,
us Jags fans don't want to talk about this, Chris. We do not want to talk about this right now.
Oh man. I wish I knew you were a Jags fan. I would have rocked I got the Fred Taylor,
Oh, nice.
The teal one, the teal Fred Taylor, man. That's
Fred Taylor and Maurice Jones-Drew. That a couple years they had that duo was unbelievable. I'm a huge Fred T guy. Love Jimmy Smith too. He was on a couple of those teams.
Yeah, they had the Smith and McCardo at wide receiver. They had some dudes, man.
Yeah. It's been a rough 15 years as a Jags fan. There's been some very, very highs and some very, very lows. But yeah, that Henry moment was certainly one of the lows.
Speaking of rough, spans for a franchise, the Giants, about a decade and a half, feeling pretty good, a couple of Super Bowl rings, but it's been a struggle ever since. And Saquon Barkley, who's essentially the franchise now, they move on from Odell Beckham, quarterback still young. This guy's the franchise, but it's been a rocky last couple of years for him, for the franchise, and for his fantasy owners. Over the past 2 seasons, Barkley has had games of 28 yards on 4 carries, which he gets hurt, 15 carries for 6 yards, 13 carries for 1 yard, 14 carries for 28 yards, and another 8 carry for 10-yard game in which he also got injured. None of those games did he score a touchdown. So over the last 2 years, first of all, he's missed more than half the games. And then about a third of the time, he's not just busting, he's absolutely killing fantasy owners. And yet he's still going 5th. Graham, am I crazy? Like, I'm a Giants fan and I don't even understand why Saquon Barkley's going 5th.
Yeah, I hear you, man. And I'm with you. Like, after the big 4, I think it kind of falls off pretty quickly between, that top 4 and then the next couple of tiers. And Barkley is certainly like, he's like the most contentious player in the first 15 picks now, like by far. It really just comes down to your risk tolerance. And for me, the way I like to build teams, like I am drafting Adams, I'm drafting Hill. I like Kelsey more than Barkley. So if I miss out on one of those top 4 picks, I'm usually flipping back over to like Adams, Hill, or Kelsey in that range. That being said, though, Barkley, man, like even if he starts slow, let's say he, misses week 1 or week 2, we don't really know at this point. But even if he does on the worst end, Man, Barkley, 14 games of Barkley is still well worth like a back half of the first round pick. And as we know, in terms of like historical win rates, the teams that get like the first pick and the second pick have like nearly double the chances of winning their league than, a team in the back half of the first round. And Barkley could be that like differentiator, is like, okay, first couple weeks of the year, I'm fine with sitting Barkley and waiting on him. But once he gets going and he gets back to his Barkley ways, like that could really pay off. But yeah, man, for me, it's just, I like those receivers and Kelsey just a little bit more in the mid range of the first round.
Yeah, like I'm pretty much on board. I mean, I think I would even go stronger. Like, I think Saquon Barkley can lose you your league. Like, I don't think because it's like, I get, like going after a guy who's going to be worth it. He's going to put up some 100-yard games, but he's going fifth, right? So, or even like there's running, like I like the next handful of running backs after him, Sean. Yeah. I mean, where are you with Saquon? Because I like Jonathan Taylor more, Chubb, Jones. Like, there's so many guys I feel better about than Barkley. And I know we kind of project these things out, and he hasn't really ever reached that 45 yards per game, 5.7 yards catches per game receiving ceiling that he did his rookie year either. So, I mean, where are you on Saquon?
Yeah, I think you said it well when you said, he's more likely to lose you your league than other guys in this range. And I think that's what the first few rounds are about, right? Like, there's no reason to take risks early on. We already said that Derrick Henry is like the safest bet of all time. But there are legit concerns when it comes to Barkley. I mean, even his 2019 season, he was a huge disappointment. Granted, he was dealing with that significant ankle injury. And then he kind of salvaged everyone's seasons in week 15 and 16. He went off. So you're going to get that from him, but you don't want like a hot and cold type of player as your first pick. So I've been passing on him unless he falls outside of the top 10. I think at that point, he probably is worth the risk because he does carry so much upside. I mean, he's one of the most talented backs in the league, but, he's playing behind arguably the worst offensive line. And I think, Kadarius Toney's, where he's going to be on the field, I think he could eat into his target share a bit if Jason Garrett knows what he's doing. So there are a lot of reasons to, fade Saquon Barkley this year. And it's easy, when he's being taken in the first 6 or 7 picks, it's very easy to fade him. For me, he has to fall outside of the top 10.
Yeah, and just another guy who his rookie year, where did you see him? Right near the top of the league in touches and carries and all that stuff. And I don't know if he's ever recovered. So like I would kind of have to. I don't think it's worth it because you say, okay, well, if he gives me good Saquon, or if he's healthy for 12, 13 games or whatever. I mean, 5 of his last 15 games over the past 2 seasons, he's gotten under 30 yards rushing. So it's not a guarantee. And I agree. I think the offensive line is still a big issue, a big question mark. I think they have a lot of pass catchers to where they don't need to feed them 5-6 catches a game. They're not a high volume, fast team anyway, under this new coaching regime. So I don't see it for Saquon. I actually have him ranked 10th. So I am a lot lower than the market on Saquon. I just think there's better ways to spend that pick at running back and at other positions, as you said, Graham. So Saquon is like the first guy I'm really kind of like full on avoiding, this high up the board. But let's go on to, Jonathan Taylor entering year 2. Sean, you just mentioned the Colts have been just hit hard with injury luck with, Carson Wentz going down now. He'll be out a while. So, I mean, Graham, is this, because we know running backs kind of depend on volume anyway, is this a good thing for Taylor that, like, similar to Kamara in a sense that he's going to have to be the offense?
Yeah. So, we've been talking about this, all the guys and I've been talking about this going back and forth with Taylor. It's like, on the one hand, they're probably just going to lean more run heavy. That'll probably give, Taylor a few more carries, maybe an extra catch or two. But on the flip side, with no Wentz, I mean, we got to ding their touchdown expectation and how efficient this offense is going to be. I mean, not only is, were they banking on Wentz staying healthy, Quentin Nelson's going to miss at least 5 weeks, could be up to 12. Eric Fisher, the guy that, their left tackle, they signed him from the Chiefs. He tore his Achilles back in February. It's sounding like he's not going to be ready until October. So, they're not going to have their starting left tackle. They're not going to have one of the best guards, if not the best guard in football. Man, I'm real concerned. And like JT is not a player like an Alvin Kamara or Christian McCaffrey, where he's going to be game script independent. Taylor is very game script dependent. They're going to play Nyheim Hines on passing downs. That's just something Frank Reich has done for years now, and I don't really see any reason for that to change. And Taylor just doesn't, to me, have as many outs as like Kamara or Barkley or, even Aaron Jones. If you can guarantee me Barkley's going to be back to near 100% by week 3 or 4, I mean, we got to love the target expectation for him. I warmed up to Jonathan Taylor. It sucks because I warmed up to him in like July, and then now I'm back down on him again with just all these injuries. I think he's well behind even guys like Aaron Jones in that range. And I love like 4, 5, 6 receivers out of him too.
Where are you on Taylor?
I don't know if I could say Jonathan Taylor sucks, but I agree with the sentiment that we should probably fade him. I have him as my running back 10 right now. He's obviously, one of the better running backs in the league, but as Graham mentioned, he's game script dependent. Nyheim Hines is going to be their pass catching back. So if they get in a trailing game script, that's going to hurt Jonathan Taylor really a lot more than running backs in this range. And, at the end of last season, the Colts went 7-2 in their final 9 games with Taylor active, and they had a really soft schedule. So we saw, Jonathan Taylor's ceiling, which is great, but we're not going to see that with Carson Wentz on the shelf, with Quentin Nelson on the shelf. Jonathan Taylor is going to struggle these first few weeks. So I'm fading him completely. And I think a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who we were drafting above Taylor last year, he's in almost the same exact situation last year. I'm buying the dip on a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and selling high on Jonathan Taylor. So I'm getting very little shares of Taylor where he's going right now.
Yeah, I'm conflicted. Like, I think you guys are a little more bearish on him than I am. Like, I do see like a silver lining with the Wentz injury, because I just think that it's, he's obviously not the caliber of player that an Alvin Kamara is, but I just think that Frank Reich is a pretty, I would say, good offensive mind. I think the team will still have a pretty solid defense. I think it's a well-coached team, a smart team that is going to kind of realize what it has to do to win. And I just think that there's a chance that like Taylor is just an absolute monster. I mean, he's not like a Christian McCaffrey level, because he's not going to get that many catches, but I could see them, he's had games where he's had, 50, 60, 65% of routes run. So it's not like they're opposed to doing it. And I think you could really see that. So like, I think it is offset to some level with kind of this Wentz injury. And I'm like, I wouldn't mind taking him and kind of seeing how that goes. I don't think he's like, for example, I don't think he's as big of a bust risk as Saquon by any means. Like, I think Saquon is a much huger bust risk. I still think the Colts, even with the injuries at quarterback and at O-line, they could still have the same like a similar caliber quarterback as the Giants and a better O-line than the Giants. So I'm on Taylor over Saquon. But you guys, I guess you could tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's just a target upside, man, for Barkley. And I mean, if Taylor's not in those positive game scripts, it's gonna be a really up and down year for him. And you're starting off the year with 2 of your best offensive linemen and the guy you were expecting to be, hopefully an upgrade on Phillip Rivers at his highest peak. But yeah, man, I love the receivers that go in the back half of the first round. I love Adams, Hill, Ridley. I love Diggs.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm drafting Hopkins. Like, I love that. Where you're taking Taylor at this point, I'm just on the receivers.
That I agree with. Yeah. But as I'm down on Saquon. I do think there's some massive upside here with Taylor, but I do agree. I think from a team building perspective, it does make more sense to go wide receiver, to maybe get a Travis Kelce, because there are some guys going kind of at the back half of the RB1 tier, and even into the start of the RB2 tier that we're going to get to, that I think are going to be able to approximate some of these guys' usage, especially when you consider that you can't predict injuries. And obviously the higher a guy is drafted, the more he has to fall. So with that being said, another disappointing guy, kind of the theme, we've had Barkley number 5, Ezekiel Elliott right there with him, as people that drafted Zeke weren't exactly happy last year. The O-line was in shambles. Dak Prescott goes down pretty early on in the season. So Graham, is Dak returning and the O-line at least a little bit healthier? Is that kind of the cure-all for getting Zeke back to being Zeke? And also, we've heard some reports that the receiving usage maybe scaled back a little bit in favor of Tony Pollard. Is this a good thing? Could Zeke be Zeke again in 2021?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, everything went wrong last year for Dallas, man. It was, not only just Dak. They were down to like their third string right tackle by the middle of the year. And then Zeke had a bunch of injuries of his own. Middle of the year, he hurt his hamstring and his calf. But before he started, kind of popping up on the injury report, and then he missed a game down the stretch. Before that, he was still getting the same exact role we know Ezekiel Elliott can perform in. In those 8 games before he popped up on the injury report, Zeke was on the field on 80% of his snaps. That's, second only to Christian McCafferey. He got 20 or more touches in 7 of 8 games. And he was leading the league in carries inside the 5-yard line. And that was with Dak being down. They not only was Dallas like top 5, top 6 in red zone drives per game, even without Dak, they were just, funneling the ball to Zeke when they got in close. And, like you mentioned, man, efficiency for backs really doesn't matter all that much. Zeke's efficiency was like, career worst last year. But if we're expecting to go back into that same role that he had before he got hurt, I think there's a legitimate chance that Zeke can kind of push for like top 3 numbers up there with Kamara, Cook, and Henry. And, especially if this Dallas team kind of continues the same pace that they were on, not even continues the same pace, but like stays like 75, 80% of the pace they were on before Dak got hurt. Like Zeke has 10, 12 touchdown upside in his range of outcomes. So yeah, man, I love Zeke. I've been taking him as early as 5. And I think he's like right in that conversation with, Adams and Hill and Kelce. Just think about it. In years past, man, we were taking Zeke, 2nd, 3rd overall. And now you're getting a nice little discount on pretty much the best situation, on paper that he's had going into a season. It's just that he's older now and people think he's washed for some reason.
No, efficiency doesn't matter, but ripped shirtless photos, those definitely matter. And I think I've seen a few floating around on the internet. Zeke, I don't think he was too happy about how last season went down. So, Sean, I just put Zeke in the category of another guy that I think people should be taking over Saquon Barkley.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of disappointing we don't get like a discount on him, based on last season, but I have him 5th in my rankings right now. And, with Dak out of the lineup and the offensive line had a ton of injuries. We saw, Zeke's floor last year. But weeks 1 through 4, when Dak was healthy, Zeke was the RB4. He's still a high-end elite fantasy asset. And, one thing that I think we should expect this year is significant positive touchdown regression. Graham mentioned it. He led the league with rush attempts inside the 5 of 26 last year, but only scored 5 touchdowns on those. Normally you'd expect, your average running back to convert those about 42% of the time. So that's 5 to 6 extra touchdowns. He should get he's an above average goal line back, but that's why I'm projecting him for over 10 touchdowns this year and why I think he should still be a top 5 running back.
Yeah, just everything went wrong, Graham, as you mentioned. You lose your center, you lose your quarterback, you lose your tight end early, and you're just like everything kind of conspired to where defenses could really focus on taking away Zeke and not letting him beat them when it mattered most. And that's why, the receivers are putting up great numbers and, the passing game was humming, but I do think we'll see a turnaround for Zeke this year. And even, I know he's on the older side, but like I've seen him going, I think, way too low in like dynasty leagues. Like I think if you're in win now mode and like you can like this guy, I think has another couple years in him, and I just don't think his price is reflective of that cost. So maybe that actually may where you get a bigger discount, ironically. But going 8th is Nick Chubb, and Nick Chubb, it's so weird because it's like I feel like there are two kinds of fantasy drafters. It's like you're either really excited to take Nick Chubb, or you're not at all excited to take Nick Chubb, but you're still going to do it because you know he's going to ball. So, like, Graham, I mean, which one are you?
Yeah, man, he's on that, like, Derrick Henry spectrum of, like, just being outliers in terms of role, in terms of passing down usage, and all of that. But, man, the biggest thing for Chubb is, like, just how much Hunt's going to play. Because last year, Hunt and Chubb kind of split passing down snaps, like, almost right down the middle when Chubb came back from that knee injury. So that was great to see Chubb finally getting a couple more passing down snaps. But on the flip side, they both split inside the 5 carries. Hunt had 9 to Chubb's 8 over the final 10 games or so. So yeah, man, I think Chubb is just naturally capped and kind of like that, he doesn't have RB5, RB4 upside, but his floor is just so safe. And I get the appeal of that. I get the appeal of safety in the back half of the first round. I'm conflicted on Chubb because, like I said earlier, I like those receivers more in that range. I think they have more ceiling potential, but I mean, there's no doubt that Chubb's floor is really safe, and it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of on that Derrick Henry spectrum.
Yeah, he's never the sexiest pick, but Sean, I know you've kind of talked him up in years past. Where are you on Nick Chubb this year?
Yeah, I think he's one of the safest bets. Really high floor, maybe a lower ceiling than you'd like in this range. But again, you're trying not to lose your draft in the first couple rounds. So Chubb is a very safe pick. He's probably the best pure runner in the NFL. Next Gen Stats tracks how many yards you would expect a running back to get for every play, gauging where blockers, defenders are. And Nick Chubb has ranked second, and first in that stat in his first 3 seasons. So, I'm more than willing to project, the maximum efficiency for him again heading into this year. But as Graham mentioned, Kareem Hunt does cap his upside. We only saw Chubb rush for 20 or more times twice last year. So, you kind of need him to be efficient. But one of the things that people don't really talk about is, we talk about Kareem Hunt's upside if Chubb were to ever miss time. But Chubb's one of the rare top 10 running backs where he will absolutely get a boost if his backup were ever to miss time. And where would you guys have Chubb ranked if Kareem Hunt's ever out? Top 3, top 4? So I think Chubb's upside is sort of the injury risk with Kareem Hunt. So he kind of has that built-in upside that I don't think enough people give him credit for. So I'm fine taking him, 8th or 9th running back off the board.
Yeah, it's not always sexy until you watch him run, and then he just, it's a thing of beauty. And I think the Browns defense, for what it's worth, will be really good, which is good for the game scripts. Like Kareem Hunt is the guy you would think will get in on more pass downs, but I really don't foresee the Browns face planning, although famous last words. But I think it's going to actually be a pretty good team, and they're going to have a lot of leads. So let's move on to Austin Ekeler going at number 9. This is one that's really interesting to me because he's a guy that I don't know if I like drafting him. I do like acquiring him. I do like playing him in DFS in certain spots, but he's a guy. I don't know if he's really built to withstand a full season of punishment. The last 3 years, 106 carries, 132 and 116. So his career high is still 132 carries. Obviously, he could catch the ball. He had 92 receptions a couple years ago, but I just don't know if he really has that 300 touch upside over a full season. It's just, he's going to be great in the games where he's healthy and he's good and he's just going to rack up the catches. But Graham, what are you doing with Ekeler in the top 10 here?
Yeah, he's been a guy that's been sliding up all summer, man. In May, he was going to like mid-second round. You can get him in the mid-second round, usually in the early second. Now, man, because of no Cam Akers, he's just slid into that, like, top 8, top 10, locked in first round pick. And I think the thing is, he's just appropriately priced. Last year in the games that Ekeler was healthy and he started with Justin Herbert, he actually averaged more receiving fantasy points per game than Alvin Kamara did on the full season. Just the receiving role is fantastic. Their new OC, Joe Lombardi, he has a very mixed track record as a play caller back in 2014 and 15 with the Lions. But, he had Joique Bell and Reggie Bush in 2014, and those backs led the league in targets. So I think, just based on the personnel that the Chargers already have and Lombardi's history, Eckler's receiving floor is just so safe. But man, this comes down to something, that's been a bugaboo for Ekeler his whole career, is like, are they going to let him score rushing touchdowns? And like, I've been back and forth with Rich Rebar about this too, just talking about it. It's just like, he is just so, we so desperately want Ekeler to have like that top 5 ceiling, but man, the lack of touchdown upside really hurts him. I think he's kind of in that Chubb conversation just for different reasons, that in terms of like margin of safety in the back half of the first round. I'm just really hoping that we don't see like Joshua Kelly and Larry Roundtree combined for like 8 rushing touchdowns. I hope they give Ekeler some more love in close, but that's the one thing in his profile that's lacking.
Yeah, I think that's always kind of when I look at Ekeler in that spot, it's just I see a guy going after him who, I think, he was kind of polarizing last year. And Sean, I think I and Friedman argued about this, but Aaron Jones, here's a guy that's going to score touchdowns. And I like Aaron Jones over Ekeler, even though I know Eckler's got more receiving upside, but I just think that the Green Bay loves Aaron Jones. Jamal Williams is gone, so it's Dylan in that role, but it's going to be a lot more Aaron Jones. Sean, where are you on Jones this year?
Yeah, I love Jones. I'm taking him over Ekeler, and another guy that I would take over Saquon Barkley. I just think after the Aaron Rodgers clarity, there's no reason that Aaron Jones shouldn't be in the top 6 right now. Like you mentioned, he has that massive upside. No, I'm not going to debate you this time about A.J. Dillon siphoning a couple goal line touchdowns. I'm with you here. He's such a good goal line back that, A.J. Dillon, if anything, is going to be a change of pace back or a handcuff, high upside handcuff. But this is Aaron Jones' backfield. And with no Jamal Williams, we could see Aaron Jones easily surpass 50 receptions for the first time in his career. I think he'll be more of a bell cow back than we've seen in the past with him. And with Aaron Jones returning to Green Bay, he has that massive touchdown upside. I love him as a top 6 option, and you can get him much later still.
Yeah, like this is a guy who I think is kind of criminally undervalued. Like it used to be that Aaron Rodgers was like the NFL's red zone guy. Like that was the guy that if you needed a touchdown in the red zone, it was Aaron Rodgers, whoever he was going to throw to, whether it was Nelson, Cobb. But like now, the Packers run through Aaron Jones in the red zone. And it's just that's what he's good at. So like I get it, some people may be worried about Dylan because he's a bigger body guy, but the bottom line is Aaron Jones is just really a good runner, especially in that area of the field. And just overall, he's right there with Nick Chubb. If you're talking about some of the best runners in the game, 5.2 yards per carry for his career on 651 rushes, 5.5, 5.5, 4.6, and then 5.5 again in his 4 professional seasons. So, and not too much tread on the tires. Like he still could post his career high. This season could be his career high in carries. It was 2 years ago at 236. So I like Aaron Jones a lot. And yeah, he's a guy that he pushes top 5 in my running back projections.
For sure. And to that point about A.J. Dillon and taking goal line work, Jones can offset that with no Jamal Williams. Williams didn't get a lot of targets last year, but he played a lot of passing down snaps. And A.J. Dillon, even dating back to his days in Boston College, he's never been a good pass catcher. So even if we just account for, A.J. Dillon gets a few more goal line carries, he gets a couple more early down carries, like those targets that Jones is going to get in the passing game are 2 to 3, 4 times more valuable than those carries that he's losing. So yeah, I absolutely love Aaron Jones this year, man. I have so much of him in the second round before the Rodgers news came. So I'm a happy man stacking my money over here.
Oh yeah, like in my projections, he's fifth at running back.
Yeah,
Which and that's
right
obviously that's because of Rodgers and your the Green Bay touchdown expectation increases, but like that's not even with Aaron Jones getting 300 carries or anything. So like he's got some upside. He's got a pretty safe floor. I love Aaron Jones, and like he might be that new like Nick Chubb, and he's going even later than Chubb. So if you're kind of unsure about Chubb and you maybe you're at the turn or something, you can get Jones a couple picks later. I think you do it. But another guy who I think, Najee Harris, he's up to 11th, and obviously there's been some injuries. Cam Akers, of course, going down. But I look at Najee Harris, and then I look at some of the other guys that at least one of us, if not all of us, have kind of expressed some concerns about, like, okay, maybe Jonathan Taylor doesn't get quite the usage we want, or the offense struggles. Nick Chubb, maybe his upside's a little capped. Saquon Barkley, obviously there's a lot of risk there with the O-line. Austin Ekeler, will he score touchdowns? I look at Najee Harris and I think, like, and Graham, I'm interested to hear what you think about like the actual talent, and he's a certain kind of back, but just I think the workload he's going to get is going to be probably as good as you can get. Because like I look at the rest of the Steelers backfield, and like there's not even a guy that I can project to make the final roster outside of Najee Harris in that backfield. So what do you think of his, like, what do you think of him as a back though? That's my first question.
Yeah. So I was blown away with how good and nimble of a route runner Najee Harris was watching all of his passing down snaps last year, man. Like, he's got a similar frame to Derrick Henry, but he's got like the grace and the movement ability of like Le'Veon Bell in his prime. Like he was such a phenomenal route runner, and they would do fun stuff with him too, man. Like they would run, these mesh concepts, and Henry would be the guy, or not Henry, but Harris would be the guy, clearing out the linebackers and the safeties at the second level to get, to get the ball to Devonta Smith. But yeah, man, the problem with Harris is like everybody knows the role is going to be sweet, and he's just gone nutso up the board. I mean, he's, you can get him in most drafts. He's going as early as like 14, 15 and as late as 20. And it's a pretty narrow range if you want him. And this has just kind of been a theme, I guess, but I'm on the receivers over Harris. I think Harris is pretty safe just from like a volume perspective, because like you mentioned, Chris, they just don't have anything else. And I'm not overly concerned about the offensive line, because, if he's getting 20 carries per game and it's only for 4 yards a pop, like that still plays for our game. But yeah, I think it's kind of like what I said with Ekeler. I think he's appropriately priced. It just comes down to, how you feel like you need to construct your team. And a lot of those second round receivers are just slightly higher on my board than Harris.
Yeah, I think, and that's a good point. I mean, I think though, what you can do is, like, let's say you're picking, back half of the first round, you can get a guy like maybe a Adams, Hill, a Kelsey. Yeah. Like you can eschew like some of the running backs that we are like not all the way in on, and I think like this is a pretty good way to kind of subdue some of that risk, just overall, just running backs in general are just risky picks because they're more likely to miss games. And I don't think you're really losing out, and you're going to get that stud receiver, that stud tight end. So I actually think Harris fits pretty good into my draft plans. Sean, what are your thoughts on Harris, and like who else are you projecting for usage in this backfield?
I'm with you there. It's slim pickings. I think Benny Snell is probably the handcuff, but I mean, he's unplayable unless Harris goes down. But, I think 11 is too high for Harris. I'm probably taking one of the top receivers in that range with my draft plan. But, I am worried about the offensive line, but we've talked about it at length today that, efficiency doesn't matter as much as long as they're getting a massive workload. I'm okay with it. And that's basically Harris. But, I was in a draft last night where I was able to get him 16th. I think that's more appropriate for Harris with some of the risk built in with a rookie. But, 11th is way too high for me. I'm off that. The hype is sort of getting out of control with Harris. But yeah, like I said, around 15 or 16 off the board is when I get him.
And to be clear, he's 11th at running back, but his overall ADP is like 15. So like that's what I'm saying. Like I'm fine with taking him.
I'm
early in the second.
I'm still taking guys like Joe Mixon or even Antonio Gibson over him. I can't get there with Harris.
Okay, that's interesting. We definitely got to talk about those guys, and that was gonna be my next question. So, Graham, I'll start with you. Gibson, Mixon, Edwards-Helaire. That's kind of the three that could conceivably round out. With Harris going 11th. Maybe you disagree, but those guys all have kind of a claim to round out the top 12. How do you rank those guys? Which one do you think has the most upside to be a top 5 back?
Yeah, so like Sean, I think it's really close between Mixon, Gibson, and Harris. It's one of those things where like, if I do take Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill at like 8 or 9 and come back and Harris, Mixon, or Gibson are on the board, I'm usually just like, I play a bunch of best ball teams, so this isn't very like applicable if you're just drafting one team this year, but I'm kind of been splitting my exposure between all three and giving Mixon like a slight edge over those three. No Gio Bernard is just massive. That's the biggest thing in Mixon's profile has been not getting any of that like third down work or, any like not enough, design passing plays. And it's made Mixon pretty game script dependent. He's had wide splits, just like Josh Jacobs, just like Derrick Henry in wins versus losses. So if we can get Mixon to, play on 60% of the Bengals passing downs, as opposed to like 40 to 50% that he's been at in previous years, that's gonna be a huge boost to his floor. I still love Antonio Gibson too, though, man. If they really do lean in on this offseason, they started in OTAs mixing in some more passing down sets. Their coaches have said all offseason, hey, like last year, because of the COVID year, we just didn't have the time to put in the passing down work that we wanted to with Gibson. We wanted to really focus on, the running aspect, getting more comfortable in terms of reading blocks, just giving more reps there. I think you can paint a picture where Gibson has like Christian McCaffrey-esque upside, where he gets like 60 to 70, 80% of the carries, gets a solid 12, 15% target share. Like there's Christian McCaffrey light in his range of outcomes. I think for that reason, I'm on Gibson and Mixon just a little more than Harris, because the Steelers might suck this year, but I think all three are pretty appropriately priced. And honestly, like, there's downside with all three between Harris and the offensive line and the Steelers, Mixon not getting the role we're expecting, and then, Gibson not getting more passing down usage. So I think the market's kind of got those three guys priced somewhat appropriately, but yeah, man, I love Mixon and Gibson.
And Edwards-Helaire, is he in like a different tier altogether? Because that was the other guy.
Yeah, for me, Edwards-Helaire is, man. It's just, when they got in close last year, they were scheming stuff to Kelsey, they were scheming stuff to Hill. Edwards-Helaire also didn't get the target share we were expecting. I thought he'd get pretty close to like what Kareem Hunt's usage was back, when Hunt was with the team, and it kind of wasn't that. There's still plenty of room for Edwards-Helaire to grow. But yeah, I think Gibson and Mixon and Harris are a cut above where Edwards-Helaire is at. I've got him like paired up with like DeAndre Swift and J.K. Dobbins in like the third.
Okay, that's interesting. Sean, where are you on these backs? Gibson, Mixon, Edwards-Helaire, and then obviously, in comparison to Harris.
Yeah, so I have Mixon and Gibson in sort of a mini tier at the bottom of the RB1 tier. And, I think Mixon is the safest bet as long as he can stay healthy. He has top 5 upside, as Graham mentioned. Without Giovanni Bernard there, we should see more of that passing down work. And the sky's the limit for Mixon, honestly. So I love taking him there. But I think Antonio Gibson does have just insane upside. And it's really amazing how well he was able to play last year. He's still learning the position. This is a guy that's converting over from wide receiver. So it was amazing how polished he looked as a rookie in a limited offseason. Yeah. So I think he's very likely to take a huge year 2 leap. We should see him more in the passing game. He is a wide receiver after all. And J.D. McKissic might have been a symptom of just having Alex Smith, the check down machine. And like Graham mentioned, maybe they didn't have enough time to kind of fit him in the offense in that way. So I love the cheaper CMC comparison by Graham. I think that really is his upside this year. So I'm targeting him heavily in this range. And then I have, Najee Harris, Chris Carson, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire sort of in a tier after that. Yeah. I think you can't go wrong with any of those guys. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a guy I'm buying a ton. He had a disappointing rookie season, but a lot of the elements are still there. He still plays for the Chiefs. He's still, going to be pretty much the workhorse back in that offense. So I think a lot of the same reasons I liked him last year are still there this year. So I love getting Helaire cheaper this year. And then Chris Carson is one of my favorite value picks in this range. I think he, he's always overlooked, sort of in this part in the draft, and he's one of the most reliable backs that you can have in sort of that RB2 range. So that's why I have him paired up with Najee Harris and Clyde Edwards-Helaire as well.
Yeah, I think Mixon is the one that really stands out for me because as you guys mentioned, he really has that top 5 upside, which is what I'm looking for. A lot of times when I'm taking him back in this range, it's because I haven't taken one. Yep. in the first round. So it's not like, obviously if you're just doubling up on backs, you're happy with almost any of these guys. You're not really paying it as much mind, but a little more is riding on it. I think if this is your RB1, and I look at Mixon and, with Taylor as the coach, you look at his percentage of backfield carries in the 6 games that he played last year, and it was 95, 94, 100, 93, 100, and then 67 and what he got hurt. So this guy was essentially getting every carry. As you guys mentioned, he has now even more upside in the pass game with Gio Bernard, and there's really not much, behind him. They have who is it? Evans, I think, and then like Williams, like nobody really of note that I think would take a ton of carries or take a ton of snaps away from Mixon. And hey, he only played 6 games last year, so you might catch him on, at like a good time where he's not just coming off a year where he took a ton of punishment. So I really like Mixon, and I think Edwards-Helaire. Yeah, I think Edwards-Helaire has a lot of room to grow. I wouldn't be surprised if Edwards-Helaire actually beat out a guy like Gibson in terms of scoring, because like my one concern about Gibson, it's not really a concern, but like Washington, I think they are going to continue to kind of spread the ball around. Like I think, they got Curtis Samuel, who they can use as like another guy like that. They use McKissick a lot more than people thought last year. They just love those type of guys. And I think they know what they have in Gibson to the point where like I don't know if we ever see them give him like those 25, 30 Christian McCaffrey touches. Also, Gibson had what was it, 12 touchdowns last year. So I look at a guy like him, 12 touchdowns on, around 200 touches. And then Edwards-Helaire only had 5 touchdowns in the Kansas City Chief offense. So I'd be willing to take my shot on Edwards-Helaire. Like I think, but Gibson, if I don't think he's going to like blast value this year. Like I think last year was the time to draft him. Like I think the best he's going to do this year is kind of hit value where he's drafted. So I'm probably not quite like, I'm not low on him. I don't mind getting him. It's just, I'm not as like excited about him. I could see him kind of landing in a similar range, even if it's to what he did over like the second half of the season, then like completely going bonkers. Like I think a guy like Mixon could. All right. Let's finish up with a couple of questions. Let's just go through our top 5 running backs in order. Our top 5 half PPR, just to kind of cover the most bases. Graham, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so half PPR, I'd go McCaffrey, Cook. Henry has kind of been the guy I've been making like the small change for in half PPR. So I'll go Henry 3, Kamara 4, Zeke 5. And can I give a bonus and say Aaron Jones is 6? Because that's what I'm doing. Aaron Jones is 6.
Love it. Sean?
Oh man, I'm gonna sound like an echo here. Yeah, my top 5 is Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Zeke Elliott, and yeah, I have Aaron Jones 6 as well.
Look at that.
Yeah, I like it. I'm gonna go McCaffrey. I'm gonna go Kamara second. I just love the upside with Michael Thomas missing time. Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Zeke Elliott, and yes, I too would also go Aaron Jones 6 as well. So a lot of love for Aaron Jones on this podcast. And let's finish it up with who is your RB1 fade, either because you think the guy's going to bust or just you have him ranked lower than the market?
Yeah, I'll stick with Jonathan Taylor. I would have said this before the Wentz and Nelson injuries too. But yeah, I just think, like I mentioned, he just doesn't have as many outs as players going around him, even guys like Austin Ekeler. And then, you mix in those injuries and the fact that the Colts are probably going to get off to a really sluggish start. I mean, they have a brutal opening schedule. I mean, it's just, they could literally start the season 1-4, 0-5. I mean, they open up the year with, I believe it's the Seahawks, the Rams, they play the Titans, Dolphins, Ravens, then they play the Niners in like week 7. It's really tough, man. And if we go with the theory that Taylor is going to be a game script dependent back, the first opening, 5, 6, 7 games this year with no Wentz, no Nelson, no Fisher, it could get rough pretty quick. So I think Taylor is a guy I'm pretty much avoiding in all of my drafts. And I'm stacking, Aaron Jones over him. I've got a bunch of receivers over him. I even ranked Darren Waller over him recently. So yeah, man, I love the player, and I was really warming up to him. Like I said earlier, it's hard for me to buy back in now with all of the surrounding factors with the Colts.
Yeah, there's a little bit of volatility there that I think, you could go with a safer pick, especially at another position. But Sean, which top running back are you fading for 2021?
Sorry, Rayvon, I think I'm stealing this from you, but it's Saquon Barkley. There's just too much downside to drafting in the first round. We stress all the time. You're just trying not to lose your draft. And I'm afraid he has that kind of downside. We're not sure he's going to be 100% to start the season. He might have to, ease in or even sit out week 1. So that's a nightmare scenario. Plus, he's playing behind arguably the worst offensive line in the NFL. And I do think first round pick Kadarius Toney will eat into his target share a bit. So there's so many concerns that you're better off taking Aaron Jones, Austin Ekeler, or Nick Chubb if you're going to go running back over Saquon Barkley right now.
Yeah, I am in total agreement. The running back that I am fading is Saquon Barkley. I think, it's such the writing's just on the wall. I mean, it's red flag after red flag. It's the prior production, even when he was healthy, like a third of the time, he gives you almost nothing. The offensive line is terrible. Even the quarterback could easily be one of the league's worst. On the other hand, there are enough other receiving options now that you don't have to just feed the ball to Saquon every chance you get. And that may be what ruined him to begin with, because his rookie year, he had so much usage. It just has never been the same. And then I don't like drafting guys who start the year hurt. Like injury risk, that's one thing that's hard to predict. But when a guy enters the year and he's hurt already, that's a big red flag, especially when you're talking about a top 5, top 10 pick. So Saquon Barkley is who I am fading at running back in 2021. Graham, man, this was a really good podcast. I really enjoyed all your insights and expertise. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to tell everybody what you're up to and where they can find you.
Yeah, man. First and foremost, thanks for having me back. This is always a fun chat with y'all, and wish you guys nothing but best of luck and success this year. Yeah, man. I'm at fantasypoints.com. At Graham Barfield on Twitter. We have like a just incredible amount of content coming out in the next couple of weeks. We've been working on what we call like a franchise focus series, where we focus on just one team every day, breaking them down from a top to bottom perspective. We have our whole staff involved with those, so you get kind of everybody's perspective there. Definitely check those out. Scott Barrett's been doing a phenomenal job with just breaking down draft theory stuff. I've got a bunch of best ball tiers articles up on the site. And yeah, man, if you want to subscribe to the site, now's the time to do it, man. We're right in that sweet spot. It's August, September. It's go time, baby. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh yeah, definitely check those out. And really, really glad to have you on. It was really great. And just want to remind people before you guys head out of here, make sure to remember that we are moving to a new feed effective immediately. So if you want to keep listening to Sean and I and our wonderful guests every week, you need to subscribe to our all new podcast. It's going to be called the Fantasy Flex. And you just go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, hit that subscribe button. Keep listening to the Shmoney. You can find Sean on Twitter at @the_oddsmaker and me on Twitter at Chris Raybon. You can follow us in the Action Network app. Also, be sure to check out actionnetwork.com for our fantasy football content and our fantasy football draft tool. Till next time, let's get this Shmoney.